Okay, so now that we've got our leg mirrored, I want to go ahead and get our arm mirrored, and that will conclude the setup of both the left and the right set of controls for our character. Now, in mirroring the arm, unfortunately we can't mirror the entire rig at once. We're going to need to do it in sections and fix those sections as we go along, and then we can work up to building up the final right arm. So let's start out and push tab with the mouse over the viewer, reactivate the mirror tool. I want to leave the prefix with R underscore, and I'm going to mirror all of the setup for our clavicle. So that's the 5 nodes that relate to our clavicle and also the shoulder position control included within those 5 nodes. So if we were to jump up, so we can grab those 5 nodes and we can see that indeed we have the right mirror plane specified. So we can push enter to mirror them, and they will get mirrored. I'm going to move these out to the right hand side of our network. Now we do have a couple of things we need to change. We do want to change the wireframe color of that control object over to red. I also need to change some references on our R underscore clavicle. If we take a look at the bone length there, we're referencing L underscore arm FKIK controls in 2 cases. Now, yes, we know that currently we don't have an R underscore arm FKIK controls, but we are going to be having an R underscore FKIK controls in a second, so we know it's going to exist and we know it's going to have that name. So I'm going to rename this now whilst we're dealing with this small handful of nodes and accept that. We also, if we jump down inside the Kinchops network, we still have a newly created inverse kinematics chop for our clavicle that we need to rename to R underscore clavicle kinematics. Fantastic. So now that we've got that in place, we can jump back up. So that's the first part of our arm mirrored over to the other side. We can see if we grab that control and move that control, we don't have stretchiness right now because of the fact that we don't have that stretchiness parameter to reference. That parameter reference is evaluating to 0, thus it's as if we'd set the parameter itself to 0 or locked, but we can see that that part of the rig is indeed functioning correctly. So now we're going to mirror the next section of the arm, and that's going to be, we've already done the clavicle, so we don't need that, all of the nodes relating to our arm, including our ulnar and radius, also our arm FKIK controls, also the 3 nodes that are going to our wrist control, all the way up to the wrist control itself, but not anything below that point. Now I did actually select those before activating the mirror tool, so what I'm going to do is activate the mirror tool. That's going to deselect a lot of those nodes, so I'm going to go back in and grab them all again with Control Shift. That's because any nodes that don't have the selectable flag will become deselected. So again, that's the exact same set of nodes, not the clavicle nodes, we've already mirrored those, but all of the nodes relating to our arm, the arm FKIK controls, the ulnar and radius, the 3 nodes going to our wrist control, and the wrist control itself. Now when we mirror this, we're also going to find that another node, the lower arm clone twist effector node, because that relates to one of the bones that we're modifying, that will get mirrored as well. We do have the right mirror axis, we can see, so we can mirror by pushing enter, and that's going to mirror our arm. And whilst we're here, before everything becomes a huge mess, let's move these out to the side. Now again, I'm not going to deal with cleaning up the network on camera. That's something I'll do off camera, because there's no real need for you to sit and watch me clean up and move nodes around in the network. So we've got those mirrored. There's a few things again that we need to change. The first, working our way down, we've got our R position at shoulder. That's actually referencing the L shoulder position, not the R shoulder position. The reason it's in the correct location is because its pre-transform is causing a negative scale effectively in X. We're doing a negative scale on everyone, then rotating negative 180 degrees. Now this is good because it's going to affect all of our controls that are parented under us, so we do want to keep that in place, but obviously we want to reference the R shoulder position. Otherwise, when we move our left shoulder, if we were to grab our left shoulder and move that, it's going to affect our left arm, our right arm as well as our left arm. So I want to grab the R shoulder, but now we're going to obviously be mirrored. Let me grab that, Control C, paste this twice over so we get the translate Y and the translate Z for that parameter. Then jump back in here for X. If I negate that, that's going to flip me back over to this side, and now we will indeed follow the correct control. Now you may ask yourself, oh, we've negated it, and again negating it with our pre-transform, but that pre-transform, recall, is going to affect everybody who's parented to us, so it's actually very important that we keep that there so that the rest of the rig functions correctly. We do have our control objects to set their color, so let's grab the arm twist, the arm IK controls, and also our super wrist control, and set the standard wireframe color on our super wrist control. And then if we flick over to one of the other controls and set the wireframe color on those controls, both of those all to red, that will give us red control objects. Now it appears in our super wrist control earlier we didn't actually link up the selector wireframe color to our overall wireframe color. That's not a problem. The ease of assets allows us to allow editing of contents, jump inside. Well, before we do, let's copy that standard wireframe parameter, jump inside, and then grab the super wrist selector, paste copied relative references, then go ahead and save our operator type, match the current definition. You'll see that now on this side we have a red control, but on this side we still have a blue control, so that's all now working fantastically. We do need to rename some of our inverse kinematics chops, so let's drop down inside our kin chops, and we've got our R upper arm. I want to rename that to R_arm kinematics. We have the R lower arm clone that we need to rename. We have our owner, so I want to rename to R_owner kinematics. We have the owner lower, which I want to rename to R_owner lower kinematics. We have our radius and our radius lower hiding in there, so let's rename both of these to R_radius kinematics and R_radius lower kinematics. Now we do have a couple of changes we need to make here on our R-arm kinematics. We do need to go ahead and change the twist to reference the R-arm twist. I also want to change the blend to reference the R-arm FK-IK controls for the blend. I also want to set up the rename chop and the null for our arm. So let's Control C, Control V, wire our right into that guy, rename these for the right hand side, grab our rename and change that expression on the rename. If we bring up the expression editor, indeed we're editing the expression, and I want to change that to R_arm kinematics that we reference. If we accept that, we can see that indeed we are now renaming those, everything is working correctly and there's no errors, so we've got that in place. So now I want to jump up and grab an expression on one of the other nodes that we need to change before we continue mirroring, and that node is where we're going to our wrist control from the master control position. Let me just zoom back in. You can see that indeed we're on the wrong side of our network, and that's because we're not referencing the correct position here. Basically we are referencing the correct location, we're referencing the correct node, which is over here, but because of the fact that this guy got scaled in a negative way, that basically means that we have then scaled that position back over to here. Now you may be tempted to delete the pre-transform of this node in such a way that we then move back over to this side. That's a bad idea in this case because of the fact that this is going to become a parent of a control object. We have this guy who is scaled negatively due to all his parenting is going to become one of the parents of a control object. This guy is going to become one of the other parents. If he doesn't have that negative scaling, when we blend back and forth between our attached and detached control, it's going to scale from a positive value to a negative value and back and forth, and that will be very, very weird. Our hand will look like it collapses down and then comes back out. That's definitely not what we want to happen when we blend. We want the rotations to blend. So instead of deleting that pre-transform, I'm simply going to negate the origin in X, since it's X that we were mirroring about. So if I negate the origin in X, that's going to still position us in the correct location. Now again, I'm not going to worry about reorganizing the nodes in our network. I'm going to do that off camera after this video. So we have the hand now to mirror, so I'm going to reactivate the mirror tool. And I'm going to select all of our hand up to the palm root, and including the palm root. So let's turn off our node names with the N, and grab all of our hand. So there's our hand up to and including the palm root. We can't actually, unfortunately, mirror this fetch object. It won't mirror, but what we can do is in a minute duplicate that manually. You'll notice that our name is still set up correctly, but now due to the fact that we're working lower down in our network, the mirror axis is incorrect. I want to mirror on the XY plane. To mirror correctly, we are going to need to tweak this later, but we can do that by the way that we parent this up under our control in a second. So yes, that's not perfectly in the correct location, but it gives us an idea. In a second we will be fixing that. So I'm going to go ahead and push enter to mirror all of those nodes, and let's move all of those nodes over to the right hand side of our network. So let me maximize that just for a second and move these over to the right hand side of our network. Again, I'm not cleaning up our network editor right now, so obviously on the right hand side this is a bit of a mess, but that's fine. We're dealing with the mirroring right now. So we got all those nodes mirrored. Now I do want to duplicate our L_fetch_wrist output. That's that fetch object that we couldn't mirror. I'm going to duplicate that manually. So let's hunt down that particular object, Control C, and then going to move over to the right hand side of our network. I'm going to find where our super wrist control itself is, and Control V to paste a duplicate. There we go. Houdini's just thinking. So R_fetch wrist output, of course, we need to update that to jump inside our R super wrist control. When we do, we can take a look at its visibility and see we are brought down here. So now we can parent up underneath this, that palm root. We can delete out its pre-transform or anything that's happened to cause it to be mirrored. If we reset that pre-transform, we'll then be directly parented under this. If you recall, when we parented in that palm root to our control object originally, that control object already matched the orientation. That means if we simply tell our palm to match the orientation coming out of our super wrist control now, we know that's going to be correct. That's going to get rid of any of the inaccuracies we had with our mirroring, etc. So I'm going to turn off the visibility first of our fetch wrist output, then grab our palm root, and whilst keeping position when parenting, we might as well uncheck that. We're going to be deleting out all of this anyway. I'm going to reparent this in now to the R fetch wrist output. We do need to go ahead and delete out any of the translation parameters in there, any of the rotation parameters in there. I also want to go ahead and delete the pre-transform that's on that node as well. So let's go ahead and reset the pre-transform. And indeed, I didn't actually want to delete the rotations that are on that palm root. Those rotations were needed. So let's go and undo back to that point. That did leave me a little bit confused for a second. I do want to delete out the pre-transform so we don't get any of that scaling, however. So let's go ahead and reset our pre-transform. You'll see that we do now align perfectly with that control object. We need those rotations because of the fact that we're dealing with the palm root and not the palm. So the palm is going to offset in a negative direction of those rotates that we have here in a positive direction, but that's fine. So if we'd have deleted out the translates and rotates on this guy, we'd also need to delete out our rotates on the palm. That too would have given us the same end result. So you'll notice we have a lot of controls that need to be given a red wireframe color, so we can do that now. So I'm just going to grab all our control objects. Let's maximize this view. And I'm going to give them a red wireframe color. Fantastic. I do want to turn off the visibility of our root. Now there's a couple of more things that we need to do. I do want to go ahead and get our lower arm clone twist effector parented up underneath our fetch wrist output for the right hand side. So let's grab our lower arm clone twist effector that we've got here and get him parented underneath the fetch wrist output. Now you're going to notice that he already had a pre-transform where he was basically duplicated and mirrored earlier. He needed to be negated. We can now remove that pre-transform. So I'm going to reset his pre-transform. That's going to move us out. If we turn on his visibility, as I just zoom in and wait for Houdini to think for a second. There we go. If I turn on his visibility, he's sitting out there where we need him. If I was to grab our wrist and rotate our wrist, that's going to take our arm bones along for the ride in terms of the twist. So that's now working. The last thing that I'd like to do is sort out the visibility on our control objects, because the visibility on our control objects are referencing the incorrect part of our network. So let's go ahead and sort out the visibility on our control objects. So I'm going to hunt down our control objects and let's take a look at their visibility and notice they are indeed referencing the incorrect part of the network. So we can change that to our R, super wrist control. And I'm selecting these all based on them having the same control level of detail, which means it's the exact same expression on all of these. So I selected that overall control, the highest level on its own, then I'm selecting that second level on all of those together, changing that out for R, and then I'm selecting each of the FK controls, those lowest, most finely detailed controls all together, so that when we change that expression, we're not changing the number that we're comparing on any one, we're only changing the reference over to the right hand side. So that should be the entire rig now set up so that we're ready for the right hand side to all be set up correctly. I do want to take a look and make sure that this is lining up with our bones, make sure that indeed this did mirror correctly. So let's bring our skeleton in, and we can see that it looks as though let's just take a look. It looks as though the IK handles for our arm bones aren't quite working correctly on the left hand side of our rig. So let's take a look at what's going on there. And indeed, those IK handles are not working correctly on the left hand side for our radius. So we need to hunt down the radius IK handles. Let's take a look at our lower arm clone. And I believe this could well be that our lower arm clone on the right hand side. So let's take a look at our lower arm clone. There's our lower arm clone on the right hand side. And then we've got those two IK handles, and they're not quite in the right locations for where they need to be. Now I want to check, is this indeed affecting those? And it is. So that means our lower arm clone is working, but for whatever reason on this side we've got a 90-degree offset on those handles. So what I'm going to do is grab these IK handles and reposition them. That means I want the ulnar, which exists at the rear of our bone. So it's the rear bone of those two. Let's move the ulnar IK handle out to line up with the ulnar. So like so. And then let's grab the radius IK handle out and make sure that this indeed lines up with our radius. For whatever reason that didn't quite mirror correctly, most likely because we were dealing with this in two separate parts, and now that is set up because we can see that our hand bones here are aligned for our hand, thus our arm bones should be aligned for the arm, and they weren't quite correctly, but we've got those in place now. So I can hide out our skeleton geometry, and that is going to wrap up all of our arm controls. In fact, there is one last thing that we need to do, and that's over on our arm FKIK controls asset. We went about duplicating all of that rename chop and everything. We didn't go about specifying that rename chop on our inverse kinematics on our ARM FKIK controls. So I do want to go over to the ARM kinematics and get the ARM kinematics grab values and accept that, and that will update that as well. So that should be everything that needed to be changed when mirroring. Mirroring the arm unfortunately wasn't quite as clean a process as mirroring the leg. You may wish to consider writing a script that would automate the entire creation process. Once we went through and did the entire left arm setup, you may well want to write a script where you could simply select the start bone of an arm setup and it would work its way down and set up the entire arm for you. That was really beyond the scope of this lesson, of this DVD, because it would have required a significant amount of development time after setting up just that left arm. So here, instead of doing that, we have looked at mirroring the rig. Unfortunately, mirroring is never perfectly clean. You do have to go through and tweak things. Hopefully I've gone through and found everything that needed to be changed. So hopefully now our right hand side of the rig does work successfully. I'll go ahead and test this off camera. If anything doesn't work, I'll jump back in. There'll be an additional video here that fixes things. But if everything is working correctly, that's actually going to wrap up everything that we wanted to do in this first character rigging DVD. We have all of the controls on our left hand side of our character created, and all of the controls on the right hand side of our character created. And all that's left to set up now are the central controls, which is going to be the focus of our character rigging 2 DVD. So with that, that is going to conclude this video. Thanks a lot, everyone.